Okay, so what we've done thus far is we've seen Lemkin's two phases of genocide. The first stage of genocide, or the first phase rather, of genocide is the destruction of targeted group members, their national pattern, right? The attempt to destroy their national pattern. And then the second phase is to replace that national pattern with, through imposition, to impose that, the national pattern of the oppressor, where the national pattern of the targeted group once existed, right? So destruction and imposition, pretty simple. The next thing that we talked about is the conceptual difference, sort of from an analytic, a semantic level, is to say, look, in the text, when we say genocide, we mean this, right? When we say genocide 1, we do not, and when we say denationalization, when you say denationalization, you do not mean the biological destruction of group members, right? So clearly you can't use genocide to replace denationalization. Also, when you use the term denationalization, not only are you not talking about the biological destruction, but you're not addressing the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor, right? You're not talking about the oppressor imposing the national pattern when we're talking about denationalization, because in denationalization we're just talking about stripping or taking or removing citizenship from those who used to be citizens, former citizens, right? And then obviously the last thing is that denationalization just basically means what I just described, right? It means the deprivation of citizenship, right? And obviously genocide is far more than the deprivation of citizenship. Okay, the next thing that Lemkin does in his analysis, right, in this sort of introductory discussion of genocide, is actually pretty interesting. All right, Lemkin said the following, right, and this has to do with the idea of enforcing assimilation within a group, right? So enforcing assimilation. You can imagine that you have a group, right? And you have foreigners, right? You have foreigners. And these foreigners are attracted to this population for whatever reason, right? Economic benefits, religious freedom, whatever it might be, right? These people are going to migrate to this new area, right? They're going to want to change their residence and migrate to this new population, right? And once they settle in this population, once these individuals settle in this population, the people who were there prior, the people who have established a society, who have established the norms, who have established the practices that govern sort of social conduct, are going to be able to enforce, and not a harmful sense, right? But you know what it is to be an American. We have a feeling of what it means to be an American. People who are attracted to America know that when they come there, there will be pressure to conform to our social norms, whatever those might be, right? And I'm not going to discuss that now, right? So that you can talk about for example, you can talk about the ization, right? The Americanization of foreigners, right? So if we talk about the Americanization of foreigners, it might be that I change my name from whatever my name was to accommodate to a regular American name, a typical American name, John, Jason, whatever. It might be the case that I change my surname. It might be the case that I have surgery and I change the shape of my eye or the color of my hair or whatever it might be, right? Because I'm feeling pressure, not necessarily directed, targeted pressure, but I'm feeling pressure to assimilate, right? So this process of assimilation, in a sense, transforms this person who was, let's just say, X into a Y, right? So that people have the pressure, they feel this sense of wanting, and not even pressure in a negative sense, because I don't want to use the word pressure because it sounds negative. It doesn't have to be negative, right? You just feel, you might have the desire to want to conform. You might have the desire, many people have the desire to want to conform to the land that they reside, and therefore they change, right? They change to adapt to that culture, right? Well, this is sort of this idea of Americanizing. Well, what Lemkin talks about is that anytime we're talking about sort of this ization, right? This ization, he gives a few examples: the Germanization, the Italianization, and so on and so on. We're talking about, it does connote an imposition, right? It does, in some sense, connote an imposition, the second phase, right? It's not to say that it's genocidal at all, right, in any sense, but it does connote an imposition of the oppressor, right? In this sense, there is no oppressor, but there is an imposition of social norms, right? The norms that you might have had in your country are not acceptable. Perfect example, child-rearing differences. Many people from the Caribbean, I'm here to testify, have the belief, if they come to the United States of America, that they can practice their child-rearing practices the same that they did in Jamaica or whatever island you came from, as you do in the States, right? And it's not to say that all Jamaicans beat their children, but, you know, it's sort of common practice in the islands, right? If your kid acts out of line, you slap your kid on the leg, you move on about your business. Well, try going to Walmart and your son or your daughter act up, and you start slapping your child on the leg. You might not leave with your kid, right? Your kid might be taken from you. You can't do that in the States, right? There are systems in place to protect children, even from their own parents, right? Where in other countries that might just be completely ludicrous, right? The point is that when a person migrates to a new country, right? When a person comes to a new country, the person has to recognize the social pressures that exist. Some of these pressures will be imposed. Some of these pressures are just assumed. And in the process, the more an individual, the more a foreigner conforms to these pressures, the more a foreigner is subsumed by this imposition of pressures, if it's extreme, the more the foreigner assimilates with the population. Right? Assimilation, however, assumes that there is a willingness by those in control to accommodate one's assimilation, right? Obviously, in acts of genocide proper, there isn't an attempt to assimilate because assimilation is not the point, right? People might want to assimilate, and what we do is we dehumanize, we use other sort of conceptual devices to keep individuals from assimilating, but we'll talk about that later.